Hi team, welcome to my session on Coffee with Prab, and thanks for following my series on ISO 27001. In my previous video, we have discussed about how to do risk assessment and how we treat the risk. Now, once we're done with the risk treatment, the next thing is that we have to go for the SOA, Statement of Applicability. So in this video, we're going to discuss about SOA and how to identify what controls we need to implement, and I will follow my aspirant's case study and how I decided I want this control, that control. With that, I'm going to explain you how the SOA works. If you're new to the channel, do subscribe to the channel. If you missed my previous video, please do check my previous video, then only you can able to understand this video, because this video is a continuation of my previous phase. Okay, for more information you can check my LinkedIn profile, and if you're new to the channel, do subscribe to the channel and click on the bell icon to make sure you should not miss my future videos on a similar topic. So without wasting a time, let's start with the first part. Thank you. So question is now, what is SOA? SOA stands for Statement of Applicability. See, once we're done with the risk assessment, where we have decided we have a treatment and all that, our next important thing is to conclude that, okay, these are the controls we required. Okay, we understood we need a control to mitigate the risk, but there should be some inventory where we can document this entire process. Like these controls are required, these controls are not required. So one thing we need to understand in ISO 27001, when we're talking about the controls requirement, one is that we implement the controls with the help of risk. What are the risks we identify? Based on that, we implement the control, and sometimes there are some indirect controls also we need to implement. Not necessary that controls are addressing any risk, but it is a requirement of ISMS. So statement of applicability is crucial document because it serves as a formal record of selected controls and address the information security risks within the organization systems. That's something we have discussed. And it connects the outcome of risk treatment process, which is specific control, ensure that identified risks are effectively managed, aligned with the 27001 standard. So when we're talking about SOA, it used to organize all the annexures control. Okay. So when you're talking about annexures are like a list of information security controls, which is also called as a catalog of controls or control sets. And as per the 27001 2022, it is revised to, we have now 93 controls in 2022 version. So it was reduced from 114 in 2013, 114, okay, to 93 controls. And the best thing is that these controls has been organized in a 4 category. One is organization controls. Second is people control. Next is physical control. And the last is called as a technological control. Now, if you take the reference here, we give them a number also actually. Okay, so we give the number also. Like when I say organization control, it is called A5. People control called as a A6. Physical control called as a A7, and technological control is called as a A8. Okay, and when you're talking about relationship to the main standard, which is called 27001, annexure A is not mandatory entirely in the organization. They select the applicable controls based on risk assessment and treatment process, which we define in the clause 6 and 8 of the main standard. So organization typically implement 90% of the more of the controls and declaring other as a non-applicable if it's not relevant to their context. So the purpose of annexure A, it serves as a reference list of potential security control, and it also helps the organization to ensure they have not overlooked the important security measure, and it provides the flexibility for organization to choose control relevant to their specific risk and business context. So annexure A in ISO 27001 provide the brief overview of each controls, and you can use for the reference purpose. And the thing we are talking about here is SOA is always link the risk assessment result to the selected annexure control. And from the certification perspective, auditor will check the implementation of control and declare as a part of the applicable of the SOA. So selection and implementation control should be justified based on the organization risk assessment and treatment process. So in summary, you can say annexure A is an integral part of 27001, and it provides the comprehensive list okay, of security controls that organization can select from the based on the specific risk need. Is it clear? So that something is there. Now, when we're talking about the control in annexures or SOA, so in SOA we organize into three categories. One is called as a applicability. It means the control is applicable for the organization. Second, we also have to give a justification. Okay, if this control is applicable, why? And if this control is not applicable, why? So we have to give a justification for inclusion also, and we have to give a justification for exclusion also. Let's say example, there is a requirement for cloud security control. Now we are not dealing with any cloud security. We're not dealing with any kind of a cloud services. So we will remove that control, and we're giving a justification is that as our business not involved with any cloud, so this control is not applicable. So this is how you have to give justification. And then the third section in the SOA we called as a implementation status. In my further slide, I'm going to show you how practically we organize this in a document. So if the control is implemented, it is fine. And if it's planned or it is not implemented, this is the status. We talk about the control requirement. Okay. Now, if you can see here, this is the sheet. So I'm going to discuss the same sheet in the future. So here you can see it's clearly mentioned. Organization controls, applicability, yes. Implementation, is it there? See, applicability, yes, mean this control is required for this ISMS. Is it really implemented? Yes. And we're giving a justification. Okay. So I'm going to discuss this document in detail in my further video. Okay. In the same video only, don't worry. Because it's very important for you to know the basics first. Okay, so we always believe that, okay, we always start with the controls, list of controls, organization control, people control, physical control, technology control, and then we set up the table. So I have already defined you control reference, control description, applicability, justification, and implementation status. In the previous template, I have shown the same thing. So control reference is very important that you will take from annexure. Okay, description, you can copy paste from the annexure. You have to check, is it applicable? Yes, it's applicable. Your justification, is it really implemented? So this is how you have to create a table. Okay, so this is the table content. Now, when we're talking about the control, the second step is determine the applicability of each control. So you have to conduct the risk assessment. So in my previous video, I done the risk assessment already. And then I decided, okay, we need a control. So let's say example, we have identified the risk related to the unauthorized access. So then the control in the access control theme will be likely applicable. So if you handle the personal data, control under privacy data protection will be relevant to the comply with legal obligation requirement. So this is how we have to select the controls. And then I will state as a applicable, not applicable. If it's applicable, the controls address a specific risk, and not applicable, the control does not apply to your organization due to the nature of organization. Let's say, so we just take an example. Now you have to give a justification. Okay, it's very important. You have to give the justification of each control. So each control explain why it's needed and how it address your risk, which include your risk treatment, compliance requirement, and business objective. One thing you need to understand in ISO 27001, okay? So in ISO 27001-22, annexure controls is not only select based on the risk treatment, we also consider other factors. Other factors like might be this control is not address the risk, but this control is required because it's a legal and compliance requirement. This control is not directly related to this, but this control is a requirement of business objective. Let's say example, we have an intellectual property. Okay, we have already identified some kind of risk about protection against unauthorized disclosure and all that. We have one control, but along with that, I want other controls also, because that is a control required for the business objective. So controls are not only select based on a risk treatment, but also based on a compliance requirement and business objective. Because I have seen here, people get a lot of doubts and confused that is the annexure of controls are select based only on risk treatment. The answer is no. Some controls we justify based on a risk treatment. Okay, we have identified following risk, and for that we have this control. Second is we have a compliance requirement like from GDPR, from DPDP, we have a requirement. And third is basically called as a business objective. And you have to give the proper justification of exclusions of the non-applicable control. Like because when we're talking about if the particular control is not applicable, you have to give a justification. Okay, so you're giving justification of lack of relevance. So if organization does not have a physical office, you can exclude certain physical security controls. Like we have employees who work from office, work from home. So we don't have any physical office. So, or second is if the control is managed by third party, it may not be directly applicable. So you're giving justification because of outsourcing. So it's very important you have to justify. And then you have to see what is the implementation status. So if it's implemented already during a gap assessment, you can mention control is already in place. Okay, if it's not implemented, you will select plan. The control is scheduled for future implementation. The thin line difference between the implemented and planned is implemented past tense. It means it's already there, but we need to implement, that is called planned. Okay, not implemented, it's not even implemented, it's not been documented anywhere. So, and make sure for each and every control, we need to define the accountability because we have to do the follow with those process. So is it a SOA is a one-time document? No, SOA is just like a risk register. The way we maintain the risk register, a live document, SOA is also a live document. It should be regularly updated whenever there's a significant changes to the organization. Now my question is that what kind of a changes? The first is when new risk is arise. Second is when changes in the process and technologies. Let's say example, before COVID, just in the month of February in India, we have implemented some controls. Now in the month of March, we have decided people will going to work from home. So according to that, controls modification get changed. Understood? So according to that, we need to update the SOA, or sometimes it's a regulatory update. So as per the standard, they say you should at least review annually or as a part of a ISMS audit or major change in the business process. That something is there. Now the question is how to prioritize. Okay, all controls are important, right? But we need to prioritize to ensure the most critical aspect of information security need to be addressed first. So how to prioritize, that's a question. So you prioritize based on the first factor called risk exposure. You need to focus on the control that mitigate highest risk. For you, PI is the most important thing. So you need to prioritize major controls based on PII. Second, based on regulatory requirement, you need to prioritize the control mandated by the applicable law and regulation. You cannot skip that. Third, a business impact. You need to implement control that protect the critical business function and sensitive data first. And fourth is resource availability, where you allocate the resource to implement and maintain control that provide the highest security values. Is it clear? So this is the factors we have. There's no video which can cover this much amount of things because this is something what I face practically in the organization. So now question is how to estimate mandatory controls. So as I said, there's no fixed number of there's no fixed numbers which is defined in the ISO. Okay, so from the next array, so applicability of each control is determined based on a context. We already discussed the context called business context and regulatory context and risk landscape. But certain controls generally essential due to the foundational role in the ISMS. So there are some controls you cannot skip. So it include like information security policy, definitely, because the purpose of information security policy is to set the objectives and principle for information security. Okay. And make sure the policy should be aligned with the business objective. So it must be there. Second is Organization for Information Security, which is called Annexure 6. Okay, which define the roles and responsibility of information security within the organizations. Okay, and it established the information security governance structure. Next is asset management, definitely required because you have assets in place. So we have to make sure properly organize things. Then we have access controls. It restricts the information and information system. And the key aspect is implementing RBAC, authentication and authorization. Cryptography, definitely you have some sensitive data. It required encryptions. So you have to develop the cryptography policies. And then we have operation security, which maintain the secure operation of information processing. Like, you know, you have to implement the chain management process, malware protections, vulnerabilities, and finally we have a compliance. See, I'm not saying, other controls are important, but at least these controls are important to pass the audit because these are the, you can say, foundational of ISMS. Okay, you must have these controls part of a ISMS. Is it clear? Because I want to show you the auditor perspective also. See, while audit don't expect all 93 controls to be implemented, but they typically expect to see some important thing like foundation. I already discussed some of the foundation like policy for information security, terms and conditions to employ, information security awareness. Okay, so this is a very important part. Now, if you ask me about policy for information security, as I said, it basically establishes the information security governance. Just imagine without policy, how can you implement the ISMS in the organization, right? So for aspirants, the policy could outline the commitment to client data protection, incident response, secure handling of training data. So that's there. Second is terms and condition of employment. So it ensures the employee understand, accept the security responsibility. That something is there. And who is the weakest link in the organization? People. So people should be aware about the things. So foundational is always ISMS controls should be there. Then we have some risk-based controls, which auditor will check, especially protection against malware, management of secret authentication, network controls, and then compliance requirement, where the controls and controls are related to the compliance and legal requirement we have, where we have a control like identifications of applicable legislation, contractual requirements. So from aspirants point of view, we are aware of that we have to comply with relevant legal, contractual, regulatory requirements such as data privacy law, GDPR, because we have a client in EU, or we have a DPDP in India, we have a PDPL in Saudi, right? Then so auditor will check these areas. Okay, second is privacy and protection of PI, so which addresses data privacy by implementing to protect the personal data. So if aspirants handle personal data during a client engagement or in training module, the control is critical. Then information transfer policies. This control is important for aspirant because when transferring training material or sensitive information to client or partners, we have to make sure we should have appropriate controls. So when auditor has an initial interview, understood? When auditor has an initial interview, based on the interview and understanding, he will going to check these controls. So that's why. So now when we face the audits, okay, we understood the auditor perspective based on a scoping. That's why we have given more importance to these controls. Now the question is, what is the immediate action after completing the SOA? That's a very good point, right? We're done with the SOA. Now question is how to do the SOA. So let me show you the sample, what I did. Now here you can see we have a statement of applicability. Okay. So we have first called organization control, under which we have a policy for information security roles, segregation, management, contract with interest group, threat intel, information security, inventory, applicable return of assets, labeling, information transfer, access control, identity management, authentication, monitor review, response. Now I will give an example here. Okay. Now here you can see, I cannot share this because it is easy to create. The reason of doing this video is to demonstrate you how to do that instead of just following a copy paste process. So here we can see policy for information security. Okay. The one challenge I always have is how to justify, because it's a game of English. So it's up to you. You don't need to write paragraph details. You can have very simple process. I said policy for information security. Is it applicable? Yes, it is applicable. Is it implemented? Yes. Justification, core ISMS requirement and set the foundation. That's why we need this. Fine. Information security role, applicability. Yes, because it defined the accountability. Even if you mention define the accountability, that is enough. Contact with authorities, applicability. Yes, because it required regulatory compliance, incident response, especially in the case of data breach. Okay. Now threat intel. Yes, providing up-to-date data threat essential in consulting environment because we involved in lot of security services project. Now here, one of the interesting thing is that return of assets. Yes, it's applicable and it is implemented, necessary for managing equipment, access right during an employee onboarding. Okay, you cannot skip this. So it's might be during a risk assessment, you cannot able to find scenario-based risk assessment, but during a SOA, we're giving justification. Yes, we need this. Okay, now I will take one example of, so we have all this. So yeah, so here you can see screening. Yes, it is applicable. It is implemented. Yes, screening help to ensure employee handling client data, sensitive information has been vetted to minimize the insider threats. It's a preventative control. Okay. Terms and condition is mandatory. You can see remote working nowadays is mandatory. Information security event reporting is mandatory. Now here we have one control, securing office and room. Okay. So initially when we did the audit, we don't have an office. So we say no, essential to secure room within Noida office, especially area where sensitive information may be accessed or stored. So we don't store anything in the office. Example, we store data in the cloud. So this control is not applicable. Physical security monitoring. No, monitor the physical space not required because it's a fully remote. Okay, so this is how we're giving justification. Okay, now here you can see clear desk. So you can see it's applicable. So during a risk assessment might be we don't conclude with any risk and risk treatment, but during a SOA, we assume that this is important. Okay. Or the second thing is that interpret SOA and based on that create a scenario based risk assessment. Okay. Example, like if you don't have a clear desk screen, what is the threat? Okay. Someone can able to see that. Okay. What is the vulnerability? Data is placed there. What is the risk? Disclosure of information. So one thing what you can do is you can use SOA as a reference point and do risk assessment. Then it is easy to do this, or you do the risk assessment based on scenarios and some risk which cannot be addressed there. Based on SOA, you can conclude those risks. Okay. So that is also possible. Okay. Now here you can see we have another things. So let me. Now here one other thing is called use of cryptography. Yes, essential for protecting sensitive data, particularly in a cloud environment, data transmission. So this is how we're giving. See, we don't have anything architecture in our organization, secure system architecture engineering. No. Aspen technology does not engage in design, development, engineering or software system. Okay, so that's there. Outsource development, we don't outsource anything. So that's it. If we outsource, we say, yes, it is applicable because we outsource some of the software third party. They do development for us. So make sure in the vendor contract, we have to address the security requirement. So you can have such kind of a things. Is it clear? So this is how we prepare the SOA. Your SOA has only 3 data. One is called a control reference. You can give the control reference. This is the control reference. Okay. Applicability. Is it applicable? What is the implementation status? Okay. And this is how we basically do the things. So after doing a SOA, what is the next thing? So once you complete the SOA, as I said, after SOA, we start with the controls that address risk, because documenting one thing and execution is one thing. Both are different. Okay. So we develop the roadmap. Okay. And we identify quick win. What does it mean by quick win mean? The controls which can be implemented with a minimal resource, we can implement that first because that saves time and lot of efforts. Is it clear? That's the most important part we have. So after SOA, we follow the clause 6.2, which is called information security objective planning. All controls we have to implement. But as I said, any kind of a control you're introducing, it should have objectives. So you have to define the information security objectives immediately after doing your risk assessment and risk treatment plan. And this ensure that your objectives are aligned with the risk landscape. Okay. And you need to address the information security need identified in the assessments. That's a very important part. And that's why for every controls, we have a policies here. Okay. So before ISMS control implementation, objectives is very important. You have to define those objectives, which include about control implementations, resource allocations, continuous monitoring, and based on objectives only, we set the KPI. Okay. KPI and metrics, which I'm going to discuss in the further clause. Now, one thing we need to understand here is that when you're talking about 6.2, okay, information security objective, it is a part of a planning phase and it should be addressed parallelly or shortly after completing of SOA, because it involves establishing information security objective at relevant functions, and it's also have a plan to achieve those objectives. Okay, so after the, when we say this 6.2 is very, very important, because until we don't have objectives, it is difficult to drive the functions. So now we need to develop the policy for each controls, because any kind of a control you're introducing, it should be backed and supported by the policies. Now, why this step is important? Because policy provide the framework and guideline for control effectiveness. That's there. Okay. So make sure for every control, we have to write or update the policies. We have to create a SOPs. Okay. And more important, whatever the policy you're introducing, for that, we have to conduct the trainings. Okay. The next is that review each control in the SOA. So for each control mark applicable, assess policies needed to ensure compliance, which is part of a policy by design. And we have to see how the controls fall into the categories. Okay. Either single policy, or you can have a 94 individual policies. In my cases, I have created one policy manual and I document everything. So this is just an example we have. You can see, actually this is step we are requiring to determine the required policies. Okay. So we have a 93 controls. Do we really need 93 policies? Not necessary. Okay. So that's why I have organized into groups. Here you can see like access control we have. Okay. So by having access control policy, you are achieving actually these controls. If you have an asset management policy, it covers these controls. If you have a human resource, you cover these controls. Okay. If you have a operation security, you have these controls. you have this, you have this. So you don't need to create a policy for each and every control. Okay. So next thing is that, okay, once you determine the policies, okay, you have to define the individual policies also. Like you start with the information security policy first, or you can do this before SOA, because information security is a foundation. Okay. Before doing a risk assessment, before doing SOA, you can have a first information security policy, then treatment policy, compliance, and sometimes we have a cross reference. Okay. So based on our aspirants, we had some privacy policy, GDPR, and we can have 12 to 20 policies. Okay. Because if you go by more policy, you will get confused. Okay. And then you can create a policy summary. That's something easy for auditor to see how the SOA control has been implemented. I will show you in ISMS manual. Okay. So this is the thing we have to do once you're done with the SOA. So I have another example here. You can see these are the policy based on the aspirant SOA, like A.5.1. We have information security policy, just a sample. A.6.2 remote work. A.7.3 acceptable use, access control policies, backup and recovery, network security policies, supplier, incident response, legal regulatory. You can see supplier threat management because we are using a GoDaddy and CRM to host our data. So by aligning the policies with applicable control from the SOA, aspirant ensure each policy directly address the organization specific risk and compliance need. I repeat again, it is not necessary controls are introduced to address the risk. Some controls are required to meet the compliance requirement, and this structure approach to policy development ensure that aspirants or my company is tailored, comprehensive, and ready for audit. Okay, that's how it basically done. So question is, how do we ensure that we are ready? Documentation, evidence, and all that when you create a policy. So make sure each policy should be well documented, approved, and accessible, because auditor can ask for the email record as an evidence. Maintain the evidence like training record, change log, supplier assessment. That's a very important part. Then review and update regularly. And if you're updating, make sure document that and have a track version, because that help you to track the changes. What are the changes you are introduced? Is it clear? So now the question is, what is the next step? Now, once you done with your risk analysis report, you have a treatment plan and SOA, submit this for the management for an approval. And we need this email as an evidence because an auditor will ask for the evidence. Okay. So email evidence is approval, authorization, and written permission. So that's our next step we have. So summary is that you're done with the SOA, you have a risk treatment plan, and you have a SOA. Okay. Everything, risk analysis report, everything we have to submit to the management. So following this management review, and they expected to provide three things: approval of SOA, go ahead and implement, authority to implement the ISMS, which is called as an authorization letter, and written permission of the management regarding ISMS implementation. That is part of a clause 6. Now, once you're done with this 6, now we got an approval. Now we have to plan the resource. So now organization has to determine and provide the resource needed for establishment, implementation, maintenance, and continual improvement of information security management system. So that's something is we need next. So here we need to identify how many people are required, how many processes are required, and how many technologies are required. So we need to first identify the resource requirement, like human resource, okay, technical resource, and financial resource, because we have to purchase tools, or sometimes we need to involve the external consultant. And then we have to allocate resource based on risk assessment and SOA. So there is one document we prepare here which is called as a resource allocation document. It is a part of an audit requirement. Okay, so you need to create one resource allocation document. This is the one, and it basically include the information about resources, budget, and specific control requirement for each priority area. So you have to document the resource allocation. It's a document that you have to create. The second clause we have is competence, where ensure individual involved in ISMS have a necessary competence. So how to do that? So to implement that, we define the competency requirement. Okay, so information security manager, IT support staff, and we will see what is the current competency we have. Okay. I was getting confused is once you talk about SOA. Now see, SOA is part of your clause 6. Okay. Now in the 7, apart from SOA controls, we need other clauses to be followed, right? So this is the clause we have, 7.2. So you need to demonstrate that you have adequate competency and who will do what. So you have to document that. Okay, so you need to have document here, which is called as a competency assessment report. That is the one thing you need. Along with that, you also need a this called competency development procedures, and you also need a competency development questionnaire. Okay, so all those things are required here. So you have to address the competency gap, what you have and what you need to follow. So training and certifications, you need a mentorships. So all data is right. So question is, what kind of a document we need to maintain here for an audit? So you need to have a training logs, and you need a competency matrix. I repeat again, you need a training logs, you need a competency matrix, you need a competency procedure. Now the next is called as a 7.3 awareness. You need to ensure employer aware of information security policy, because I'm assuming you have implemented a clause 6, you implement all the controls. Now question is, you need to convey people, boss, we have a ISMS. So you have to develop the awareness program where you have to regulate training sessions, awareness campaigns, policies, content, compliance, all those things need to be updated in that. And how can you demonstrate that you conducted awareness program? So you need a logs. Okay, you can track the attendance, email records, and content records with the newsletter evidence and all that. Because auditor will say, show me the sent email of your awareness campaign, show me the attendance records. So that's how you can show that. Now we have a next clause, which is called as 7.4, how you communicated the informations. So you have an internal, you have external. It means if you do any kind of a changes, how you communicate about information security. So you have to document your internal communication, and you have to document the external communications. So how you notify clients and vendor about changes in the ISMS policy, how you inform the people. So like for the internal, you use email, internal chat. For external, you use some kind of emails and all that. So you have to document that as an evidence. So you have to create a communication plan document, because it's also part of an audit. So that is the document we need. Okay. Now next is called as a 7.5 documented information. So whatever the activity we're doing, okay, we have to document that, right? Documentation is a very important step. So here you need to identify required documents, like we using SOA to determine the necessary documents like policies, risk assessment results, training records. We have to organize these documentations. So you can store this document systematically in a secure document management systems with the version control. And when you're talking about document, one thing is that when you're creating a document, so you can mention the identification, okay, and review process. It's a very important part. So let me show you how it look like. So in my previous audit, I maintained this template. So you can see document ID is policy 01. The same you will create, you will mention as a reference ID in policy. Information security policy version is 1. The date was created 2023. The review will be 2024. Okay, next review is 2025, and this is the owner. You can see restrict level, data storage is location, notes is approved by the CEO. So this is how you can able to create a documentation management log. It's very important. Okay, otherwise you get confused how many documents we have, and you can define the folder. So we have a second called access control policy. Okay, you have a data protection policy, acceptable use policy, backup and recovery policy, incident response procedure. Okay, document control procedure. You can see this is just an example I'm talking about. Okay, so each document has a version and same ID number you have to give in a document. So if I show you here, give me a second. Now here you can see document classification, internal ISMS POL01. Now here you can see the same thing, ISMS POL01. Okay, so this is how you need to maintain. So that is how you can able to track. Okay, so you have to have this document management system. Okay, because it helps you to track how many documents we have and how you maintain that. The next step is you have to protect this document from unauthorized access. We have to make sure it has a version control, so you can able to track who introduced the changes. And for retention period, all ISML documents, like example for audit records, you have to retain for 3 years. Incident logs might be for kept 5 years, because it was my requirement. And then you have to, so while creating this document control policy in log, you are actually achieving the 7.5 clause. Okay, so summary, what you need in clause 7 is resource allocation document, competency assessment report, matrix training logs, awareness of the training logs, communication plan document, and more important, document information 7.5. Okay, so this is how we do that. Now the question is, what is next? So we have to create a ISMS manual. So after completing 4 to 6 clause, okay, you have to create a ISMS manual, because when auditor come for an audit, he check the manual only. So you have to establish the risk assessment methodology and complete the plan. And after doing SOA and extra of control, you can create a ISMS manual. So before implementation of clause 8, you have to create a ISMS manual. And the reason is very simple, is ISMS manual serve as a top level document that provide the overview of your organization ISMS. And it consolidates essential information about your ISMS framework, stakeholders, auditors, structures, and key policies. So how the ISMS manual look like and what is the content of ISMS manual, let's understand that. So when you're talking about your ISMS manual, the first part is you need to give an introduction. I'll show you the sample also so you get a better visibility. So first we need an introduction where we talk about the overview of information security importance and the commitment. Second is scope, like you have to define the scope, location, department. You can copy paste this scope from the ISMS context scope. Third is context. Again, you can copy paste that context from the context document. Information security policies, roles and responsibility authority. That is another important thing where we're giving a roles and responsibility for ISMS governance, like commitment and everything. Then what is the risk assessment you have to take? What is the SOA? Control overview and operational control procedure. Now, when I say operation control procedure, it is an overview of your operation process, like access control, incident management, chain management. Okay, so a reference to detailed procedure we have. And then we have a document control and record keeping, which are a description of how the documents records are managed. And finally, we have a internal audit review and continual improvement for corrective action. So let me show you how the document look like so you get a better visibility. Team, this is how the ISMS manual look like. You can see we given the reference history. So purpose and objective, scope, terms and definition, context, roles and responsibilities, policy, compliance monitoring, performance evaluations, KPI, risk assessment, document keeping, appendix, continual improvement, and annual ISMS review. So here you can see purpose and scope. Okay, scope has been defined here. So I was doing a little bit formatting here. Sorry for that. So I've copy pasted the scope. I've copy pasted the scope from there only, the scope document, terms and conditions, terms and definitions. Then again, I copy paste the context from the context document. So this is basically your roles and responsibility. Okay, who do what? Then what is, you can copy paste this from your risk assessment document. Then what are the policy you need? Okay, compliance monitoring. Okay, performance evaluations, then objectives, KPIs we have. It is not mandatory. It is, good to have, but it's not mandatory. Then risk assessment criteria, how you did the risk assessment, what kind of a documents you have, SOA, retrieval audit reports, training records. Then we talk about the SOA here. What are the selected SOA? So you have to copy paste the entire SOA here. Then we have a continual improvement. For that, what activities you do, corrective actions and improvement logs. Then we have ISMS review and policy compliance. So this is basically talk about the ISMS manual. Okay, so as I said, the manual should be overview, not a detail. It should be reference point, because when auditor come for an audit, the first thing he check the manual. So manual should be easily accessible and make sure it's a central document. It's a central document. So you have to make sure you should regularly review to keep the ISMS manual updated. And if you're going to change anything, maintain the version history. Do let me know how do you find this video, and tell me frankly, I really put a lot of efforts. So I want your genuine feedback. How do you find this video? Do you find something new? Do you find this video is different from other what you have seen in the past? Is it really make sense? Is it a practical? Because my next video will be on the further clauses. Okay. If you're new to the channel, do subscribe to the channel and click on the bell icon to make sure you should not miss my future videos on a similar topic. Good day. Bye.